I was standing on a train platform with no car, barely any cash, and a phone that was down to 11% battery. The train that carried my mother, my brother, and my sister had already pulled away from the station. I could still see the blur of the windows moving past me. And the worst part, the part I will never be able to fully explain to someone who has not felt it, was that I could hear them laughing before the doors even closed. I had given that family years of my life, my money, my time, my silence, and my loyalty. And they left me there as a joke. What they did not know, what none of them could have predicted standing there laughing and pulling out their phones to record the whole thing, was that the moment that train disappeared from my sight was the exact moment I stopped being available to any of them. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honestly. If the people closest to you, the ones you had been quietly carrying for years, turned your pain into entertainment and then waited to see how long it would take you to crawl back, what would you do? Would you forgive it and try to keep the peace? Would you confront them and demand an answer? Or would you go completely quiet and start building something they would never be able to touch? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because Patricia's answer is going to surprise you. My name is Patricia. I was 29 years old when my mother left me at Cloverfield Station on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, and I want to tell you this story the right way. Not to make you hate my family, not to perform pain for sympathy, but because I spent too long convincing myself that what happened to me was normal, that it was just the way families work, that if I complained then I was the difficult one. And I need someone to hear the version of events that I was never allowed to say out loud. Let me start by telling you who I was before that Saturday because that matters. I was the daughter who answered every phone call. I was the one who showed up when my brother Derek called at 11 at night needing a ride from somewhere he should not have been. I was the one who covered rent when my mother said she was short, and then watched her spend money on things she did not need the following week. I was the one my sister Melissa called when her car got towed, even though she had my car at the time because hers was in the shop for the third time that year. I was 29 years old and I was working a full-time job in logistics management, building something slow and steady, and every time I got a foothold, the people in my family found a way to pull a little more of it toward themselves. I want to be fair here. My mother, whose name is Diane, is not a monster. She loves her children, I believe that, but loving your children and treating them equally are two completely different things. And in our family, those two things had never been the same. Derek is the oldest. He was 34 when this happened. He has always been the one my mother called her golden boy, not out loud, not in those exact words, but in every decision she made over 30 years, the preference was clear. Derek could borrow money and forget about it. Derek could miss family dinners and it was because he was busy. Derek could make mistakes and it was because life was hard on men. Melissa is the youngest. She is 25. She has always been the baby in the way that never quite ends. Melissa could do whatever she wanted and it was because she was still young. Melissa could take things without asking and it was just how she was. Melissa could say something cutting and mean and it was just her sense of humor. And then there was Patricia, that was me, the middle child, the dependable one, the one who worked hard because someone in this family had to, the one who kept her feelings in a drawer because no one ever seemed to have time for them, the one who paid for things because paying for things was just expected of me by now. I had been doing it so long that nobody even said thank you anymore. It had become background noise. Patricia will handle it. Patricia will figure it out. Patricia does not need as much attention. I had been sending my mother $400 every month for almost 3 years. I am not saying that to make myself sound generous. I am saying it because it matters to the story. She had asked me initially when her hours got cut at the restaurant where she worked. I said yes because she needed help. But the hours came back, other help came in, and the 400 kept going out of my account every single month without anyone questioning it. When I gently brought it up once, my mother said, "You know it goes to the household, Patricia. It's not like I'm keeping it." And that was that. The topic was closed and I did not raise it again. Derek owed me $2,300. That is not a number I am guessing at. I have the I have the bank transfer records. I had sent it in four separate amounts over about 18 months because each time he came to me with a story, and each time I believed the story enough to send the money, and each time he promised to pay it back, and each time the promise evaporated within a week like morning fog. Melissa had borrowed my car for 11 days when her car was supposedly getting fixed, and during those 11 days she got a scrape along the rear panel, denied it for 2 weeks, and then finally said it was already there. I know every scratch on that car, it was not already there. None of this made me angry enough to say anything. That is the honest truth and I am slightly ashamed of it now. I told myself it was family. I told myself that money was not more important than relationships. I told myself that keeping the peace was a form of love. But what I was really doing, and I understand this clearly now, was keeping myself small so that no one would feel threatened by me. I had learned very early in that family that making yourself too visible, too successful, too independent, too confident caused a kind of discomfort in the people around me, so I made myself useful instead. Useful people are tolerated. Useful people are kept around. It is a sad substitute for being loved, but it was what I had learned to accept. The trip to Maplewood City was something my mother had been talking about for months. There is a big market there every spring and she and Melissa love going to look at things. Derek had agreed to drive because he had the biggest car, a used SUV he had bought with money that was partly mine, but I had stopped thinking about it. The plan was simple. We would leave Saturday morning, spend the afternoon at the market and around the city, have dinner somewhere, and drive back the same night. My mother had been looking forward to it for weeks. I had said yes because saying yes to things like this was what I did. It was how I participated in a family that did not always make it easy to belong. I want to tell you what that morning felt like because I think it captures something important about where I was mentally before any of this happened. I woke up at 7 and made sure I had cash because I knew Derek would not want to stop at an ATM. I packed snacks for the car because I knew my mother gets headaches if she does not eat on long drives. I brought a small umbrella because the weather that morning looked uncertain. I sent a reminder text the night before about the departure time so nobody would be late. These are the things Patricia does. These are the invisible labors that the family relies on and never acknowledges. I was not keeping a list of them at the time. I was just doing them. That is how deep in the pattern I was. We left at 9:30, only about 40 minutes late, which for our family was practically early. The drive to Maplewood City was about 2 hours. My mother sat in the front with Derek. Melissa sat next to me in the back and spent most of the drive on her phone, which was fine. I looked out the window and listened to them talk and thought about a report I needed to finish for work on Monday. I was not unhappy, that is important to say. I was not sitting there in some cloud of resentment. I was just present. I was just the fourth person in the car, the one who had packed snacks and remembered the umbrella and sent the reminder text, going along to have a family day. The market was good. My mother found some things she liked. Melissa bought a candle set and a pair of earrings. Derek ate most of the food samples at the vendor stalls. I bought my mother a small embroidered bag she had been looking at for a few minutes too long because I could tell she wanted it but would not spend the money on herself. She said thank you in that quick, distracted way she has, already moving toward the next stall. I put it in the tote bag I was carrying for her and followed the group. We had been at the market for about 3 hours when we decided to walk to the train district on the other end of the city center. Maplewood City has a beautiful old station building that they turned into a kind of cultural area, with shops and a small food hall inside, and Derek had read about a new burger place that opened there, so we walked over. It was a nice afternoon. The streets were busy. We were talking and moving together, and it felt like a normal family day. It felt like something I had been hoping it would feel like. We ate at the burger place. My mother had a wrap. Derek had 2 burgers. Melissa could not finish her food, and I ate what she left because I had not eaten much and I did not want it to go to waste. We sat at a table by the window, and I remember looking out at the old station platform that you could see from where we were sitting, thinking it was a pretty view. Old brick and iron railings and pigeons, and the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything look a lit. La Golden. When we finished, we needed to get back to where Derek had parked the car, which was about a 15-minute walk back through the market district. My mother wanted to stop at a pharmacy she had seen on the way in to pick up a prescription she had not been able to get filled near home. The pharmacy was 2 streets away from the station food hall. Derek said he would bring the car around to a pickup point near the station entrance to save us the walk back. Melissa said she would go with my mother to the pharmacy. I said I would wait at the station entrance and keep an eye on where Derek was going to pull up. I want you to understand how ordinary that moment was. It was a completely practical division of tasks. Nobody argued, nobody raised their voices. We split up casually the way families do in a busy city when there are logistics to manage. I walked to the station entrance, which was a beautiful old archway that opened onto the main platform area, and I stood there and waited. I texted Derek to confirm where he was pulling up. He sent back a thumbs up emoji. I texted my mother to ask how long the pharmacy would take. She said maybe 10 minutes. I stood there with the tote bag I had been carrying all day, the one with my mother's embroidered bag inside it and the leftover snacks from the drive and the small umbrella, and I waited. About 5 minutes in, I realized I had not been to the restroom since before we ate. The station had public facilities inside, past the entry hall. I thought about it and decided to go quickly. 10 minutes was enough time. I told no one because there was no one right next to me to tell, and I sent a text to the group chat that just said stepping inside for 2 minutes, back at the entrance shortly. I went inside, used the facilities, washed my hands, and walked back out through the entry hall. The entrance area was empty. I looked left and right on the platform road where Derek was supposed to pull up. No car. I checked my phone. It had been about 8 minutes since I went inside. There was one new message in the group chat sent 3 minutes ago, and it was from Derek. It said, "Lol, she actually went inside." There was a laughing emoji next to it. Then Melissa had replied with 3 laughing face emojis. Then my mother had replied with, "I can't believe she fell for it." Then there was a voice note from Derek that I could not hear because I was outside with traffic noise. But I could see from the preview that it was 17 seconds long, and from the waveform it sounded like laughter. I stood on that platform road and read those messages twice. I am going to be honest with you. My first feeling was not anger. My first feeling was confusion. I genuinely could not understand what was happening. I thought maybe they were laughing about something else. I thought maybe there was a misunderstanding. I actually looked around expecting to see Derek's car pulling in somewhere nearby because surely this was not what it looked like. I called Derek, he picked up on the third ring, and the first thing I heard was background noise and laughter, and then his voice saying, "She's calling, hold on, hold on." More laughter. Then he said to me, "Hey, we started heading back, we figured you'd find your way." And then someone, Melissa I think, said something in the background that I could not make out, and there was more laughter, and Derek said, "Okay, but how are you getting home?" And then he laughed again. And then he said, "Derek put 50 on 3 hours." I did not understand that sentence immediately. I asked him to repeat himself. He said, "Derek put 50 on you taking 3 hours to get home. Mom thinks too. Mel says you'll call crying in an hour." And then the call cut out. I stood on that platform road in Maplewood City with 11% battery on my phone, a tote bag that belonged to my mother, barely enough cash to cover a train ticket home, and absolutely no idea what to process first. The confusion had passed. The confusion burned away like paper, and what was underneath it was something I had never quite felt before in relation to my family. It was not sadness, it was not even anger, it was recognition, clear and cold and complete. Like suddenly seeing a shape that had always been in front of you but you had never looked at directly. I had been looking just to the side of it for years. They had planned it, that was the part that kept landing on me in waves as I stood there trying to think. This was not a spontaneous thing that got out of hand. Derek sent that first message 3 minutes after I went inside, which meant they had already moved the car before I even had a chance to come back out. They had coordinated it, they had placed bets. My mother, my own mother, had said she could not believe I fell for it, meaning she knew it was coming. She had participated in a plan to leave me stranded in an unfamiliar city, and then turned it into a game about how long it would take me to get home. I sat down on a bench near the station entrance. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that because I think it would be easy to assume I sat down and cried. I did not. I was too busy thinking. I counted what I had. I had $62 in cash because I had spent the rest on lunch and the bag I bought for my mother, which I noticed was still in the tote bag I was carrying. My phone was at 11%. I knew roughly where we were in the city from the walk earlier. I pulled up the transit app I use at home and checked if it worked for Maplewood City, and it did. I found a train route that would take me to a connecting point and then to a station about 4 miles from home. The ticket was $19. I had enough. I bought the ticket on the app. I went inside the station, found the right platform, and I sat down and waited for the train. I did not call anyone. I did not text anyone. I did not reply to the group chat. I sat there in that beautiful old station with the golden afternoon light coming through the iron windows, and I thought about my life very carefully for about 40 minutes until the train arrived. The train ride home was an hour and 20 minutes. I had a window seat. I watched Maplewood City shrink behind me, and then it was just fields and smaller towns and gradually the familiar edges of the area I had grown up in. I put my phone on low power mode to preserve the remaining battery. I listened to the train sounds. I looked out the window and I made some decisions. I want to tell you what those decisions were, but first I need to tell you what I understood during that train ride. Because it was not just about the day. That day was one clear, bright, terrible window into something I had been living inside for a very long time without seeing its shape. I had been useful to my family for years, not loved in a full way, not respected as a person with needs and limits, but useful. I was the one who covered gaps. I was the one who did not complain. I was the one who organized, remembered, paid, showed up, and stayed. And somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself that being needed was the same as being valued. It is not. Being needed is just function. You can need a tool, you can need a machine. Needing someone and valuing them are completely different experiences, and I had been confusing them for years because confusing them was more comfortable than the truth. The truth was that my mother had helped plan a joke that left her 29-year-old daughter stranded in a city with no ride and limited resources. The truth was that my brother had made a bet about how long it would take me to get home, which meant he had thought about the scenario in advance and found it funny enough to put money on. The truth was that my sister's contribution to the moment was 3 laughing emojis, and the truth was that not one of them had called to check on me. Not once. In the time it took me to buy a ticket and board a train and ride an hour into that journey, not a single person in my family had called to ask if I was okay. They had not texted either. I checked, there was nothing. That was the fact that sat in my chest the heaviest, not the leaving, the silence after. I got off at the connecting station and waited 12 minutes for the next train. It was dark by this time. I had a granola bar left in the tote bag from the snacks I had packed for the car ride, so I ate it. I thought about the report I needed to finish for work on Monday. I thought about the lease on my apartment that was coming up for renewal. I thought about a conversation I had had with my manager about 2 months ago where she had mentioned a coordinator position opening up in the spring and whether I would be interested. I had said I needed to think about it. I had been thinking about it and saying nothing ever since. I got home at 9:47 that night. My house is a rental, a 2-bedroom, and I had been living there alone for a year after my last roommate moved out and I had not found someone new yet. It was quiet when I came in. I charged my phone, I made tea, I sat at my kitchen table and did not call anyone. The group chat had more messages. Derek had posted at around 8 o'clock, "Still no call, she must have figured out the train, owe you 20 mom." My mother had replied with a smiley face. Melissa had said, "Honestly kind of impressive." And then there was a final message from Derek. Somebody tell her it was just a joke, don't want her to be weird about it. That message had been sent at 9:30, 17 minutes before I got home, and no one had actually followed through on it. Nobody had texted me to say it was a joke. Nobody had called. Derek had suggested someone else do it and then let it drop. I read all of it. I put my phone face down on the table. I drank my tea. I went to bed. The next morning was Sunday. I woke up and lay in bed for a while. After getting up, my phone had messages. My mother had texted at 8:15, "Morning, Patricia, hope you got home okay, it was just a bit of fun." My sister had texted a GIF, one of those reaction GIFs that people send when they do not know what to say but feel like they should say something. Derek had not texted or called. I looked at those messages for a long time. Hope you got home okay. Not I am so sorry for leaving you stranded. Not I feel terrible about yesterday. Not even are you all right. Just hope you got home okay, with the immediate shelter of it was just a bit of fun placed directly behind it like a shield. My mother had already framed it. It was fun. If Patricia has a problem with fun, that is Patricia's problem. I typed back, got home fine, thanks. And then I put the phone down and went to make breakfast. I want to explain what was happening inside me during those quiet days after the station, because from the outside it probably looked like I was handling it calmly. And in a way I was. But it was not the calm of someone who has moved on or forgiven or decided it was not a big deal. It was the calm of someone who had finally decided to stop pouring energy into a direction where it kept disappearing. It was the calm of a decision that had already been made and just needed to be lived out. I went to work on Monday. I met with my manager at her request because she had a scheduling question, and at the end of the meeting, I told her I was interested in the coordinator position if it was still open. She looked pleased. She said she would send me the formal application internally and that I should apply as soon as I could. I said I would. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal notepad and I wrote down 3 things. 1. Stop the $400 monthly transfer to my mother. 2. Do not lend money to Derek or Melissa again. 3. Figure out what the rest of my life looks like if I stop building it around a family that left me at a train station and placed bets on how long it would take me to get home. I am going to tell you what happened over the following weeks and months, and I want you to stay with me because this is where the story becomes less about a single bad day and more about the long pattern that the bad day finally made visible. The first week after the station incident, my family behaved as if everything was fine. My mother called on Thursday about something unrelated, a question about a recipe she was making for a neighborhood thing, and she spoke to me in exactly her normal voice. Not subdued, not careful, not apologetic, just normal, like nothing had happened. Like Thursday conversation Patricia and Saturday abandoned at the station Patricia were the same person expected to have the same availability. I answered the recipe question, I said goodbye, I hung up, and then I went to my phone's banking app and I stopped the recurring transfer. $400 gone from her account for the first time in 34 months. I did not mention it to her, I did not warn her, I just stopped it. I want to be clear that I did not do it in anger. I did it because the only reason I had continued it for months after it was no longer genuinely necessary was my own discomfort with disappointing her. And I had just had a very clear lesson in how much my discomfort mattered to her, so I stopped it. The second thing that happened that week was that Derek called me. I almost did not answer, but I answered on the fourth ring, which is longer than usual for me with him. He sounded normal too, the way my mother had sounded normal, and he talked for about 3 minutes about something going on at his job before he finally said, casually like it was a footnote, "Hey, about Saturday it was just messing around. You know that, right?" I waited a moment before I replied. And I said, "I know what happened on Saturday, Derek." That was all I said. He said, "Right, okay, so we're good?" I said, "We're fine." And we hung up, but we both knew those were two different answers. I applied for the coordinator position that week. I worked on the application for 2 evenings and submitted it on Wednesday. My manager emailed me Thursday afternoon to confirm receipt and to let me know panel interviews would begin in 3 weeks. I felt something shift in my chest when I read that email. A small but real thing, like a hinge opening. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with my cousin Renee during this period because Renee is important to the rest of this story in a way I did not expect. Renee is my father's niece, so she is not from my mother's side of the family. She and I are close the way cousins become close when their families are complicated, which is to say we understand each other without having to explain a lot. I had not told her about the station incident yet, but I called her about 2 weeks after it happened and I told her the whole thing. Renee was quiet or a long time when I finished. Then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, "Patricia, I want you to hear me clearly. That was not a joke. A joke has a punchline that the other person can also laugh at. What they did was a test. They were testing how far they could go and how fast you would come back, and the fact that they placed bets means they have done this kind of calculation about you before, even if not out loud. They know what you do. They know you solve things. And they wanted to see it. That is not affection, that is entertainment." I had not thought of it in exactly those terms before, but she was right. That was exactly right. Renee also said something else. She said, "What are you going to do differently?" And I told her what I had already done, stopped the transfer, decided not to lend money, applied for the coordinator job. She listened and then she said, "That is a start, but Patricia, I need you to also prepare for them to notice. When the money stops, they notice, and when they notice, they will come to you with a story. And you need to already have your answer ready before the story starts because the story will be designed to undo everything you just decided." I wrote that down after we hung up. I wrote it in the same legal notepad with the three things. The story will come, have your answer ready first. She was right about that too. The first call that felt like the story arriving came from my mother on the 14th of the following month. She called on a Thursday evening, which was unusual because she usually calls weekends. Her voice had a particular quality I recognized, the one that sounds gentle but has a question underneath it. She asked me how I was doing, asked about work. We talked for a few minutes about nothing specific, and then she said it. "I noticed the transfer did not come this month. Is everything okay with you? Are you having trouble?" I had thought about this moment. I had rehearsed my answer in the shower. I said very calmly, "Everything is fine with me, Mom. I had a look at my budget and I am not able to continue the transfer right now." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I see." 2 words loaded with everything. I said, "Is there something specific you need?" She said no, everything was fine. We said goodnight. She hung up faster than usual. 2 days later, Melissa called. I knew immediately by the way the call started that my mother had sent her. Melissa opened with, "Hey, how are you? I have not talked to you in a while," which was her signal that this was not a regular call. We talked for a few minutes and then she brought it up in her own way, saying, "Mom mentioned the money situation. Is work going okay?" I said work was going great. She waited for me to explain further. I did not explain further. She said, "She worries, you know." I said, "I know, but I am doing well." We hung up. Then Derek called the next day and he did not even bother with small talk. He just said, "What is going on with Mom's money? She needs that." And I felt a very small but important thing happen inside me when he said that, because the word needs was doing a lot of work there. She had been managing before I started sending it. She had been managing just fine. What the money had done was add a layer of ease that had become expected. Expected to the point where stopping it became a crisis. I said to Derek very evenly, "I have changed my budget. I hope that works out." He said, "That is cold, Patricia." I said, "Enjoy your evening, Derek," and I hung up. Cold, he had called what I did cold. A woman who had sent $400 every month for nearly 3 years, who had lent him more than $2,000 he had never repaid, who had carried everyone's things and packed everyone's snacks and remembered everyone's umbrella and got left at a train station as entertainment had finally stopped one transfer and the word that came was cold. I wrote that down too, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I needed to remember what language they used when I stopped being useful, because that language would tell me everything about what the relationship had actually been. 4 weeks after my initial application, I had my panel interview for the coordinator position. It went well, better than well. I had prepared thoroughly, which I always do for things that matter to me, and the panel asked good questions and I gave honest, specific answers. My current manager was on the panel and she nodded in a way that told me something. 11 days after the interview, I was offered the position. The salary was $14,000 more per year than what I had been earning. I did not tell my family, that is a significant detail. I did not announce it in the group chat. I did not call my mother with good news. I did not tell Derek or Melissa. I told Renee. I told 2 of my work friends. I took myself to dinner at a restaurant I had been wanting to try, and I sat at a table alone and I ate a good meal. And I thought about what my life could look like if I kept making the kinds of decisions I had been making since that Saturday at Cloverfield Station. I want to tell you about the apartment because the apartment is important. I had been meaning to move for about a year. My current place was fine, but it was on the smaller side and the building was showing its age in ways that were becoming inconvenient. There was a building I had driven past a dozen times on the way to work, newer, bigger units, good light, in a quieter part of the neighborhood. I had looked it up online a few times and always decided it was not the right moment. With the raise from the coordinator position, it was the right moment. I put in an application, I was approved, I signed the lease, I would move in 6 weeks. I had not mentioned to anyone in my family that I was thinking of moving, but even if I had, I do not think they would have reacted in the way you might imagine, with concern or interest. The reaction my family usually had to my life decisions was a kind of mild acknowledgement followed by a redirect towards something that affected them more directly. So I made the decision without involving them and began quietly preparing for the move. The first public moment, the first moment where my changed behavior became visible in a family setting rather than just a phone call, happened about 2 months after the station incident. My mother hosts a Sunday dinner every few months. She started doing it a few years ago, inviting close family, cooking a lot of food, sitting around the table for the afternoon. I had always come. I had always brought something, usually a dish or a dessert. I had always stayed late to help clean up. It was expected. It was one of those family performances where my presence was assumed without being requested. The dinner was on a Sunday in early summer. I knew about it. My mother had mentioned it twice and Melissa had mentioned it once. I did not say I was not coming. I did not make an excuse. I simply did not go. I went for a walk by myself that afternoon in a park near my apartment. I bought an iced coffee. I sat on a bench and read a book for an hour. I came home and cooked my own dinner and sat at my own table and had a quiet evening. My phone started receiving messages around 3 in the afternoon when the dinner would have started. First from Melissa, "Are you coming?" Then 20 minutes later from my mother, "Patricia, where are you?" Then from Derek, which surprised me a little because Derek rarely messaged during family events, "Mom is asking about you." I did not reply until the evening was over. At 7:15, I sent one message to the group chat, "Sorry I couldn't make it today, hope the dinner was good." 4 words back from my mother, "We will talk." Nothing from Derek or Melissa. The call from my mother came the next evening. She did not sound gentle this time. She said, "You did not come to dinner and you did not even call to let me know." I said, "I know, I am sorry for the short notice." She said, "There was no notice, you just did not come." I said, "You are right, I should have given more notice." She said, "This is not like you, Patricia." And I thought, yes, it is. This is exactly like me. This is the version of me that stopped existing for a while. This is me coming back, but I did not say any of that. I said, "I had a quiet weekend, I needed it." She said, "We are family." I said, "I know." We were quiet for a moment and then she said, "Derek thinks something happened to upset you." I waited, I said, "I am fine." We said goodnight. Something happened to upset you. Derek had correctly identified that something had changed, but the framing was fascinating. Something had happened to me, something had upset me. The agency was positioned outside of the family, like the family was the stable element and I was the variable that had been disturbed by some external force. The train station was not mentioned. The bet was not mentioned. The 17 seconds of laughter in a voicemail was not mentioned. The 3 laughing emojis were not mentioned. The $400 per month for 34 months that had just stopped were not mentioned. Something had upset me, as if I was a mood and not a person with a memory. The months that followed were a kind of education in how my family adjusted to change. They adjusted in stages. The first stage was normal contact with an edge of confusion, the calls that felt slightly off, the messages with a question underneath them. The second stage was the guilt approach, softer language, references to family, reminders of history. The third stage, which I had not expected as clearly as it arrived, was the needs stage. This is where real life started to press on the situation in ways that could not be managed by guilt alone. Derek had been having money trouble for a while. I knew this. Vaguely, he had a habit of living at the edge of what he earned and then needing a bridge when something unexpected came up. In the past, I had been a bridge he could cross. He called me in late summer, about 4 months after the station incident, and this time the casual opener lasted about 30 seconds before he got to the point. He said he needed to borrow $1,600. He said he had a car repair situation and a bill that had fallen behind and things had just stacked up. His voice had the quality of someone who had been thinking about making this call for a while. I said, "Derek, I am not in a position to lend money right now." He said, "It is just until next month." I said, "I understand, but I cannot do it." He said, "Patricia, it is not a big ask, it is just temporary." I said, "I know you see it that way." He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I hear you and I cannot help right now." There was a pause, then he said, "Since when?" I said, "Since now." He said, "Is this about the train thing? You are still on that." I said, "I hope things work out with the car and the bill, Derek." He said, "Unbelievable," and hung up. I sat with that call for a while after it ended. "Is this about the train thing? You are still on that phrasing. The train thing, like it was a minor episode, like being left stranded in a city while your family placed bets on your humiliation was a thing, a small category of thing, something that normal people move on from after a polite interval. You are still on that, as if I was malfunctioning by remembering it clearly. As if the correct behavior was to have laughed it off by now, recycled back into the person I had always been, resumed the transfers and the lending and the Sunday dinners and the $400 months without skipping a beat. I did not call him back, I did not explain further, I had nothing more to add. Melissa's situation came a few weeks later. Melissa had been living at home with my mother, which she had done on and off since finishing college. She had a part-time job and some online work she did from home, and she was not terrible with money, just very comfortable spending my mother's money when her own ran low. But a conflict had come up at the house. I got the story in pieces from different phone calls over 3 days. The condensed version is this. My mother had asked Melissa to contribute more to household expenses, something she had avoided with some success for a long time, and Melissa had responded badly and they had argued. Melissa wanted to move out, but she did not have enough saved for a deposit and first month's rent on a decent place. Melissa called me on a Tuesday night and told me the whole situation, the argument, what my mother had said, what she had said back, how she felt stuck. I listened to all of it, and I heard the approach coming before it arrived, the way you can hear a door about to open before the handle turns. Melissa said, "You have that 2-bedroom, right? The new one." I had told her about the new apartment when I moved, that much I had shared. I said, "Yes." She said, "Could I stay with you for a few months? Just until I get my deposit together." I said, "No, Melissa, that would not work for me right now." She said, "Just a few months, I would not be any trouble." I said, "I know, but the answer is no." She said, "That is cold, Patricia." There was that word again, cold. I said, "I hope the situation with Mom works out. I am here if you want to talk about it." She said, "Okay," and we hung up, and she was not as angry as Derek had been, but she was quiet in a way that meant she was disappointed. After that call, I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about the word cold and all the different ways my family had used it or implied it since I had changed. They called it cold when I stopped the transfer. They called it cold when I stopped lending money. They called it cold when I missed the Sunday dinner. They called it cold when I said no to Melissa moving in. Cold was the family's word for Patricia behaving as if she had her own needs and limits. Cold was what I was called when I stopped being the warm resource they could access on demand. It was an interesting word choice. It told me that the expectation had been warmth, meaning available, meaning yes, meaning there when needed, meaning the open door and the full account and the empty seat in the car that was always mine to occupy until it was not. I thought about warmth and what real warmth actually looks like. Real warmth is not never saying no. Real warmth is showing up honestly with genuine care in a way that is sustainable and mutual. What I had been offering was not warmth. It was compliance dressed up as warmth. It was silence dressed up as peace. And when the silence and the compliance stopped, the family called what was underneath them cold. That told me everything about what they had actually been receiving all along. I want to tell you about something that happened in September of that year because it changed the shape of the story in a way I had not anticipated. I was at work on a Thursday when my manager, whose name is Linda, stopped by my office and mentioned that a project I had been overseeing had received a recognition note from the department director. It was not a huge thing internally, but it was visible in the right direction. I had been in the coordinator role for about 3 months by this point, and I was finding my rhythm in it. I liked the work. I liked having the scope to organize things at a larger scale, and I liked working with the team I had been given. The recognition led to a conversation a few weeks later about a new project, a regional coordination initiative that the company was piloting, and Linda asked if I would be willing to take the lead on it. It was a significant ask. It meant more responsibility, more visibility, and if the pilot went well, a likely promotion within the coming year. I said yes. I said it immediately and without hedging and without asking if it was too much or whether someone else might be better suited. I just said yes. I tell you this because I want you to understand the contrast. In my family, I had been trained to make myself smaller than I actually was. I had been trained by years of experience to hedge, to offer, and then pull back, to frame my own capabilities modestly so nobody would feel threatened or outshone. At work, I had none of that training applied to me. Nobody had ever asked me to be smaller there. And so, in the absence of that particular pressure, I was just myself. And myself, it turned out, was quite capable. Renee came to visit in October. She stayed for a weekend and we cooked together and talked for hours and walked around the new neighborhood. She said the apartment was beautiful and she meant it. She said, "You look different." I asked how. She said, "You look like you have space around you, like you are not always slightly braced for something." I had not thought of it in those terms, but when she said it, I felt it was accurate. I had been braced for a very long time, not consciously. But the way you brace when you live in a family where the ground is never quite solid under you, where kindness is conditional and criticism can arrive from any direction without warning. I had been carrying that brace in my body for years without knowing its name. She asked me if I had spoken to my mother recently. I said we had brief calls. She asked if my mother had ever directly addressed the station. I said no, not once. Not in any of the calls we had had, not in any message, not through Derek or Melissa as messengers. The station had never been directly addressed by my mother. It was the thing around which all our conversations had quietly rearranged themselves, the thing they were all slightly aware of, but it had never been named. My mother had called it a bit of fun when she texted me that Sunday morning, and that had been the entirety of her accounting for it. Renee said, "She is waiting for you to go back to normal and make it disappear." I said, "I know." She said, "What are you going to do if she waits a long time?" I said, "Keep living my life." The thing that happened in November was not something I had planned for, and it came with a kind of difficult feeling that I want to be honest about because I do not want to make this story feel simple when it was not. My mother called me on a Wednesday and her voice was different, not performing. Actually different. She said she had been to the doctor and there was something they wanted to run more tests on. Nothing was confirmed. Nothing was certain. But there was a thing they were watching, and she would know more after the follow-up appointment. I want to tell you honestly what happened in me during that phone call. The old reflex rose up immediately. The one that says run toward it, fix it, be there, set everything else down. That reflex is real and it is not a bad instinct in and of itself. But I had learned enough in the preceding months to distinguish between the reflex and the right action. The reflex is automatic. The right action requires thought, so I listened to my mother carefully. I asked clear questions. What had the doctor said exactly? When was the follow-up? Was she going alone? She said Derek was going to take her. I said I was glad she would not be alone. I said I would check in after the appointment. I said, "I am here if you need anything specific, Mom." She said, "Okay," we hung up. I sat with that for the rest of the day, and I made a decision that I want to explain carefully because I think it is the most nuanced thing I did in this whole story. I decided that I would be present for my mother's health situation in an honest, caring way because I did genuinely love my mother despite everything. But I would not use her health as an excuse to undo every boundary I had built. I would not allow the of a medical situation to be the thing that opened the door back to the old arrangement. I would show up with love and care. I would not show up as a financial resource or an emotional punching bag or a problem solver for whatever else was not related to the actual medical situation. Those were two different things, and I was capable of holding both. The follow-up appointment happened 2 weeks later. Derek took her. I called that evening. The doctor had found something small that they wanted to continue monitoring. It was not urgent. It was not immediately serious. She would have another scan in 3 months. It was the kind of news that is unsettling but not immediately catastrophic. My mother sounded relieved that it was not worse. I was relieved too. I told her so genuinely. I said, I am glad it is being watched and that you are in good hands. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, very quietly, I know I have not always been the easiest on you. I held the phone and waited. She did not say more than that. She moved on to asking about my work, and that was that. But those 10 words stayed with me. I know I have not always been the easiest on you. It was small. It was sideways. It was not a real accounting of anything specific. But it was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging that the ground between us was not even. December came, and with December came the question of the holidays. My family had a particular holiday tradition: Christmas Eve at my mother's house, Christmas Day at whoever felt like hosting, which in practice always meant my mother's house too, and then a sort of collective drift between New Year's Day and the days before it. I had always been present for all of it. I had always contributed food and usually some form of money for shared gifts. I had always stayed late. I called my mother in early December and told her I would come for Christmas Eve, but I would not be staying for Christmas Day. I had made plans to spend Christmas Day with Renee and her family, which was true. My mother was quiet for a moment and then she said, plans with who? I said, with Renee. She said, instead of your own family? I said, I will be with family on Christmas Eve. She said, you know that is not what I mean. I said, I know, but I have made plans and I am keeping them. She said she understood, in a voice that meant she did not understand but was choosing not to push. That was actually progress. Christmas Eve at my mother's house was the first time I had seen Derek and Melissa in person since the station, which was almost 9 months earlier. I want to describe it accurately. It was awkward in the way that a room is awkward when everyone knows something is different but no one has agreed on what to call it. Derek was louder than usual, the way people get loud when they are trying to fill space. Melissa was friendlier than usual, the kind of friendly that has a question inside it. My mother cooked a very good meal, and we ate it and talked about things that were not the things we were actually all thinking about. At some point during the evening, Derek made a comment. He was telling a story about something that had happened to a friend of his, and the story involved getting stranded somewhere without a car, and it was a genuinely funny story in itself, but when he got to the part about being stranded, he glanced at me very briefly. It lasted maybe 1 second, and I looked back at him with a steady, even expression. He finished the story, and everyone laughed, and the moment passed. But we both knew what that glance had been. It was acknowledgement, Derek's closest approach to naming the thing. He had put it inside another story and looked at me for 1 second to see if I saw it. I saw it. I did not react, I just saw it. After dinner, I helped with some of the dishes and I said my goodbyes at a reasonable hour. My mother walked me to the door. She held my hands for a moment before I left, which is something she does when she wants to say something she does not know how to say. She looked at me. She said, I am glad you came. I said, me too, Mom. She said, we will be better this year. I thought about that sentence for a long time driving home. We will be better, a collective commitment without a specific accounting. A forward-looking statement that did not require looking back. It was the family's way of closing a chapter without fully reading it, but it was something. And I accepted it as something, knowing it was not the full resolution I might have wanted in a different version of this story, but understanding that full resolutions between real families are rarer than stories make them sound. I spent Christmas Day with Renee and her family, and it was warm and easy, and the food was different from what I grew up with, and the conversation moved without effort, and I laughed more than I had laughed in a long time. I drove home that night feeling something I wanted to name carefully. No. Triumph, not happiness exactly, something more like alignment, like my life was pointed in a direction I had chosen rather than a direction I had inherited. The new year arrived, and with it the outcome of the regional coordination pilot at work. The results had been compiled, and the director had shared them with the department, and they were good. Measurably, provably good. The pilot had achieved what it set out to achieve, and then a little more. Linda called me into her office in the second week of January and told me the company was expanding the program and she was recommending me for the newly created senior coordinator role that would oversee the expansion. She named the salary. It was $22,000 more than what I had been making before any of this started. She asked if I was interested. I said yes. I said it clearly and immediately and without apologizing for it. I called Renee that evening and told her. She said, Patricia, I am so proud of you. And she said it in the way that meant she had been watching the whole year of this and knew what it had cost and what it had built. That kind of pride is a different thing from congratulations. It lands deeper. I want to tell you what happened with Derek in January because it came as a surprise even to me. He called on a Saturday morning, which was unusual, and his voice did not have the edge it had carried since the summer. He sounded tired. He said, Patricia, can we talk, like actually talk? I said yes. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, I know I have not been good about a lot of things, the money and the train thing. There it was, he actually said it. The train thing by name directly. I know it was not just a joke, I knew it at the time, I knew it was something else and I did it anyway and I have been carrying that. I let him finish. He said, I am not asking for anything, I just needed to say it. I said, thank you for saying it. He said, is there any of us left? I thought about that question carefully. I said, I think so, but it is different now. He said he understood. We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things. It was the most honest conversation I had had with Derek in probably a decade. I am not going to tell you that everything was fixed after that call. It was not. The $2,300 remained owed and he did not bring it up and I did not expect it. The relationship with Melissa remained at a careful distance, cordial but not close. My mother continued in the slow way she had been continuing, warmer than she had been in the months just after I stopped the transfer, not completely direct, but trying in the sideways way she was capable of trying. The family had adjusted, not perfectly, not with a grand reckoning or a full accounting, but in the real, imperfect way that families adjust when one person stops pretending. I moved through winter and into the early spring of the following year. The senior coordinator role was challenging in the way that good work is challenging, requiring more of me but also giving more back. I had built a small but genuine life in my new apartment. I had relationships I had made room for by making less room for dysfunction. I had weekends that belonged to me. I had savings that I was not quietly giving away to fill holes in other people's lives. I had goals that I was working toward without apology. On a Saturday in early spring, almost exactly 1 year after the station, I was sitting by the window of my apartment with coffee, looking out at the street below, and I thought about Cloverfield Station. I thought about standing on that platform road with 11% battery and $62 and no ride. I thought about the train pulling away with my family on it. I thought about the laughter before the doors closed and the silence after. And I thought about who I had been walking into that day and who I had become walking out of it. I had been afraid to disappoint people my whole adult life, not because I was a coward, but because I had learned that my value in my family was transactional. If I kept providing, I kept belonging. If I stopped providing, I became inconvenient. The station made that transactional truth undeniable. They had not even waited a day before placing bets on my inconvenience. They had made it into a game in real time. And the game had accidentally shown me something I could not have seen from inside my old behavior. What I found on the other side of the station was not a clean, dramatic transformation. It was slower than that and more complicated than that. It was a series of quiet choices made one at a time in the direction of a self I recognized and respected. Stop the transfer, do not lend more money, apply for the job, take the opportunity, move to the apartment, miss the Sunday dinner, say no to Melissa, stay present but on my own terms at Christmas. Accept Derek's imperfect, sideways apology as real without requiring it to be more than it was. Keep building, keep going. My mother called me on a Tuesday in March, the March of the following year, and she said she had been thinking about things and she wanted to say something. She said, the way we left you at that station was wrong. I have been ashamed of it and I have not known how to say so, but it was wrong. I am sorry. I did not perform a reaction. I did not cry or immediately reassure her or tell her it was all fine now. I said, thank you for saying that, Mom. It meant more than you knew. She said, I know. We were quiet for a moment, then she said, I want to do better. I said, I know you do. We talked for a while after that about small things, about her health check which had come back clear, about the neighborhood, about a recipe, normal things but with a different air underneath them. Something had finally been said and the air was a little cleaner. I am telling you this story not because the ending is a victory you can point to and measure. There is no dramatic scene where everyone is confronted and made to admit everything and the family is transformed overnight. That is not what actually happens. What actually happens is quieter and takes longer and is more personal than public. What actually happens is that one person stops absorbing all of the pressure and starts taking up space, and then the whole system has to find a new equilibrium, and the equilibrium it finds is imperfect but more honest than the one before. I am 29 years old and I have a life I built in the year after someone left me at a train station. A senior coordinator role at a company that values my work, an apartment with good light and enough room, a relationship with my cousin who sees me clearly, a slowly improving relationship with my mother that is based on a little more truth than it was before, a relationship with Derek that might become something real over time. A respectful distance from Melissa that is not war but is also not pretending. I kept the tote bag with my mother's embroidered bag in it for 2 weeks after the station before I finally brought it over to her. She had forgotten about it by then. I took it out and handed it to her without explaining where it had come from, and she looked at it and said, "Oh," and put it on the table and started telling me about something else. I watched her do that and I felt the last of something old and heavy release from somewhere in my chest. I bought myself a new umbrella, a better one I chose for myself. If you watch this whole story, I want to ask you one honest thing. There is probably someone in your life who has been quietly absorbing everything, paying the gaps, keeping the peace, carrying the bags, and never quite saying anything. Maybe that person is someone you love. Maybe if you're sitting with an uncomfortable feeling right now, that person might be you. What would it take to stop waiting for people to notice what they are taking and start building the life that is already yours to build? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and Patricia's story is not finished yet.